Hi everyone. Hey, I had a little idea to start off the new year. I was going to make a video about albums that were released in '74 and '84, and then I started to think about some of the bands that I talked about last year, the first 10 years in the history of a band. And I thought about how some of those bands who had released albums in the '70s had also, reached some kind of point of success or struggle by the 1980s, depending on who we were talking about. And so I thought, I wonder, it would be kind of interesting to think about the albums that certain bands released in 1974. What was their situation at that time, and then contrasting it with albums they released in 1984. But as I started looking into it, I found it was actually not so easy, because a lot of bands who did release albums in 1974 did not release a 1984 album. They released one in '83 or '85. And then bands who released albums in '84, I was wondering about what their 1994 release was like. But then again, a lot of the bands who released albums in 1984 did not release albums in '94, or some released in '74 and '84 but not '94, but then again in 2004. So I decided to put this idea together as kind of a thread. If anybody wants to jump on this, you're welcome to do so. What I want to do is to talk about bands who have released albums. We'll talk about the albums that they released in years ending with 4, and we are looking for consecutive decades. So there are 3 things to consider. One, yes, they have to be released in consecutive decades. For example, 1974, 1984, 1994. If you have a gap, for example, 74, 84, 93, 2004, then the chain ends after 2 albums only. All right, so you've got your 74, 84, but there's no 94 album, so you can forget about 2004. Unless they did a 2004, 2014, then you can consider that as a second chain beginning. Okay, so they have to be consecutive decades. The next thing to consider is that they should be studio releases, original studio releases. So if they released a live album or a compilation album, that doesn't count. Although EPs are acceptable, particularly since some EPs have 4 or 5 tracks, so that's okay. Singles do not count. If it's one song with a B-side, or one song with like 2 B-sides or whatever, that's just a single, it doesn't count. So we're looking for full-length studio albums, double albums if you like, or EPs. They are acceptable. And then the third thing is they have to be in your collection. Okay, because I could tell you about, for example, Kiss's debut, 1974, I have that, but I do not have Animalize from 1984. Or Jethro Tull, War Child, and Undercover, I think. Anyway, I don't have either of those. And Eloy, I have their 1974 album Floating. I do not have their 1984 album. So in cases like that, I can't talk about them. Even Saga. Saga had an album in '94, 2004, and 2014. I only have the 2004 album, so I can't talk about them. All right, so consecutive decades, no live albums or compilations, studio albums or EPs are fine. And what was the last thing I said? Oh yeah, you have to actually have them in your collection. So I'm going to start it off. 1974, Judas Priest released their debut album, Rock-A-Rolla. Interesting album, because even though Rob Halford and Glenn Tipton are new to the band, the material on here is almost all the older stuff from when Al Atkins was the lead singer in the band. So all basically material that Judas Priest had been playing for the last few years before Al Atkins left and Rob Halford and Glenn Tipton joined. So Glenn Tipton provided just a little bit of the material on this one. Then we go to 1984, and we have Defenders of the Faith, and of course Judas Priest are now on top of their game. They are one of the biggest bands in the world for the heavy metal scene. They are the kings of heavy metal, and really only the drummer is different. Yeah, otherwise the same guys on guitars and vocals. So there you go, 1974 and 1984, what a difference, and what a long way they came. So next, another band debuting in 1974. Here's Rush, their debut album with John Rutsey on drums, and very much a hard rock Led Zeppelinist type band. And now we skip ahead to 1984 with Grace Under Pressure. They've come a long way, and in fact by this album here they are quite different. They are adopting an 80s style sound. The guitar sound is different. There's synthesizers more. Their songwriting style has changed a lot over the intervening years between the debut and Grace Under Pressure. So there's our 74-84 for Rush. Unfortunately, Counterparts was 1993, so we lost the chain there. Let's see here. Next up, oh, another interesting band. Here's Scorpions, Fly to the Rainbow, released in 1974. The band that recorded the debut album had split up. Guitarist Michael Schenker had joined UFO. Rudolf Schenker approached his friend Uli John Roth, and Uli John Roth said he could join his band, which was Dawn Road, I think, but said that he wanted Klaus Meine to come in on vocals. And so the new Scorpions was born. Dawn Road changed their name to Scorpions, and we got this album here. Dawn Road was much more of a progressive band and had a keyboardist, so the keyboard player from Dawn Road is on here as well. It does have kind of more of a progressive feel than what the Scorpions sound came to be known as. Then by 1984, we have got the whole new lineup, and Scorpions are now also on top of their game. They have reached pretty much the peak of their success. Probably it was going up a little bit more after this, but here with Love It for Sting, of course, Rock You Like a Hurricane, Bad Boys Running Wild, Big City Nights, and Still Lovin' You, the big tracks off of this one. So what a difference these 10 years made, huh? All right, next one, 1974, Deep Purple's Stormbringer with Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale in the band. The second album with this lineup, and actually the last album with this lineup, because of course Ritchie Blackmore would leave after this album. So having more of a funk sound, although Stormbringer is kind of a precursor to, I think, to what Rainbow was going to do in a way, at least lyrically. So there's that, and then of course 2 albums later the band split up, but they get back together again in time for a 1984 release, this time the Mark II lineup with Ian Gillan and Roger Glover. So here's Deep Purple in 74 and 84. There was no 94 album, it was 93 the battle rages on. So again, the chain is broken after only 2 releases. All right, our next band, they really doubled down in 74. Here's Queen with 2 albums in 1974, Queen 2 and Sheer Heart Attack. Some consider this to be Queen's best album. Certainly it's got to be one of their heaviest. This one showing the sign of them moving, still keeping some of that hard rock, heavy rock sound, which they never really got rid of the hard rock sound totally, but starting to show more variety in their music. It started here, I think, and it's coming out more here. So usually Queen fans will cite one or the other as their favorite Queen album. And then by 1984, we got The Works with Radio Gaga, Hammer to Fall. I don't remember what else is on here. But actually, I always thought I wouldn't like this album, and I've come to like it quite a bit here. So Queen, 2 albums in 74, probably because they had a kind of a delay in getting started with releasing albums. They were recording material as early as 1971, but it wasn't until 73 before their debut came out. So 2 albums in 74, 1 in 84. Okay, so still we're only looking at, though, 2 years, 74 and 84. It's been quite of a struggle, and I actually thought I would have been able to get 3 decades with this band, April Wine. However, when I double-checked, their album Stand Back was from 75. They released a live album in 74, which doesn't count. So 1984, this is April Wine's Animal Grace, and this was the final album to be recorded before the band actually split up. Miles Goodwin and the other fellow, Greenway. Suddenly forgot his name now. They would go on to work together to record the final April Wine album of the 80s with a bunch of session musicians in order to fulfill the contract. But anyway, April Wine, Animal Grace in 84, and then they got back together in the early 90s and dropped out 2 albums in quick succession. So this one here, Frigate, is from 1994. Unfortunately, by the 2000s, they would only release 1 more studio album, and that was 2006. So no 74 album and no 2004 album. We have 84 and 94 for April Wine. And everybody's been doing just 2 decades so far. I'm telling you, I looked into a lot of bands. I checked Iron Maiden, I checked Slayer, I checked, I don't know, there are probably bands, I just simply don't have their 94 material, or, you know, I don't have their 74 material. But I did have one artist to cover 3 decades. Here she is, Miss Lee Aaron, with her 1984 album, Metal Queen. And this is interesting because this is a 1984 heavy metal, melodic, heavy metal, hard rock type album. But by the time we get up to 94, Emotional Rain, she's doing more of an alternative rock with a bit of kind of a grunge sound in it as well, for Emotional Rain in 94. And then, interestingly, by 2004, she has gone into more of a jazz, little bit blues type thing, and contemporary female slow, pretty songs. Again, I keep, every time I hold up this album and talk about it, well, it's maybe only my second time, but I praise it for its variety and all the great songs on here. But anyway, Lee Aaron, so far for me, she manages to get, the only one who gets 3 decades in, with 84, 94, and 2004. So, that's what I've got. What do you have? So, yeah, I invite anyone else to join in on this thread. One thing is, if you do a video like this, where you're following this kind of, you know, albums released in years ending in 4 chain type thing, please do tag me so that I can come and watch your video. I want to see what you have. All right, everyone, thanks for watching today, and see you again another time. Bye.